Hello and welcome. This is Sadhusman. In this video, we are going to discuss DEX measures. DEX measures are dynamic calculations that are stored in a data model and the result changes depending upon the context. They can be applied to visuals in the same way as calculated columns. The good thing is they do not take as much space in the data model as the calculated columns. One thing important is to note that the measures are model level objects, which means that their names must be unique in the data model. DEX measures are evaluated against the original data source instead of the visual they are placed in. And each of the DEX measures is calculated independently. So one DEX measure in a visual is independent of another DEX measure in the same visual. And they're all calculated for each cell in the data model. Take an example of this visual in which we have various rows and columns, and the values are calculated against the combination of the row and column. When we put a DEX measure in the visual, the value 1, 1 is calculated against the context of column number 1 and row number 1. So the data actually is filtered based on the selection of the row and column. The value of the combination then is put in the visual. The model will go on to calculate the second value of row 2 and the column 1. And when the data is filtered based on the value in the row 2 and column 1, there will be an answer. And that answer or that result will be put in the visual as value 2-1. This process is repeated for all of the values in the visual. Let's see how can we add DEX measures in our data model and what are the best practices of using DEX measures. So we have a file in which there are certain tables in the data. I would like to calculate the sum of sales for each of the product categories. For that purpose, I'm going to add a DEX measure. But before we do that, one of the best practices is to have a separate measures table. Whenever we have a lot of measures in the data model, it is easier to navigate through all those measures by having a separate measures table. In order to do that, we have to create a blank table by clicking on Enter Data in the Home tab. Let's call this Measures Table and click on Load. Once we have the table, we can see that it's a regular table with on the fields pane here. What we are going to do is we have to create a new measure, and the way the measures are created is the same as the DEX calculated columns. So we are going to add a measure by the name of total sales, and I'm going to use a very simple function sum, and I'm going to sum the sales values from the sales table. So I'm going to put in sales and I will get to the sales column. I will close the parenthesis, press enter, and now you can see that we have a total sales measure in the measures table. We don't need this column 1 anymore, so we are going to right click on this and click on delete from model. Confirm. And then we have just a simple measures table with one measure inside the total sales. We can put this measure in the visual, and I'm going to create a matrix visual here. I would like to see sales values for different product categories. I'm going to put the categories in the rows and total sales in the value section. I can also slice my data with respect to regions. So I'm going to add regions in the columns. So I'm going to put cities from the regions table in the columns. Now you can see that we have a simple sales by product categories and by cities. You can see the icon on the next to the total sales measure is like a calculator. This differentiates measures from other calculated columns and other fields in the data model. So if we evaluate the individual values against Islamabad and graphic cards, what does this DEX measure do is actually filter the original table with respect to the city Islamabad and the category graphic cards. And the combination of these two filters is this value of 40,307, and the value is put in this visual. And then it moves on to the next cell and it filters the city as Islamabad and category as hard drive, and the value is put in this cell. And therefore, it iterates over all of the table and for all the combination of cities and product categories and put in the values in the matrix visual. In the total column, you can see 679 million. The 679 million is the sales for the city of Islamabad only, which means that only the city is filtered and the categories are taken as a whole. So this calculation is done for each and every cell of the matrix visual. And when the calculation is done, then you can see the values in the visual. The measures are very important in do some customized calculation in the data model. In future videos, I'm going to share various DEX measures which you can use to perform your desired calculations. So I hope you would have enjoyed the video and thanks for watching.